It was a typical morning when everything changed. I had woken up to the sound of my mother's voice calling me to hurry up for school, and as usual, I threw on my uniform, grabbed my backpack, and rushed out the door. Little did I know that today would be different. That today I would find myself standing up for something I didn't even know I had to fight for. I was just another student at a school in a quiet neighborhood, where most of the kids looked and sounded the same. The teachers knew me as quiet, shy, and studious, someone who always got good grades but kept to herself. It wasn't that I had no friends, but I preferred to stay in my own world, doing my work and listening to music during breaks. My language, my native tongue, was something I never thought twice about speaking at home, with my family, or with a few close friends who understood it. But outside that space, it felt like a part of me I had to hide. I had always known that my way of speaking wasn't like the others at school, but it never bothered me much. One morning, everything changed. It started with a simple greeting. As I entered the classroom, I spoke to my friend in our language, something we had always done without thinking. I didn't see anything wrong with it. I was just saying hello, asking how she was doing. But then came the voice of Miss Walker, my history teacher. "Excuse me, but what was that you just said?" she asked, her tone sharp and serious. I froze, confused at first. What had I done wrong? I looked around, and the whole class was watching us. My friend, who had been with me, looked just as lost. But Miss Walker didn't wait for us to respond. "You are in America now," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We speak English here. You can't just go around speaking some foreign language in my classroom." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I had never been reprimanded for speaking my own language. Growing up, I had always felt pride in the way my family communicated, the way my words connected us to our heritage. But now, standing in front of my teacher and classmates, I felt small. She called me out, making me feel like I'd done something wrong, as if my language was a problem. I didn't know how to respond. My throat tightened, and I could feel the eyes of the class on me, some judging, others simply confused. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her that speaking my language didn't make me less of a student or less capable of learning. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down quietly, my face burning with embarrassment. I knew I wasn't the only one who spoke a different language at home, but in that moment it felt like I was the only one being singled out. The rest of the class went by in a blur. I couldn't concentrate on anything. The math problems on the board, the discussions, nothing seemed to matter. All I could hear were the words echoing in my mind over and over again. "We speak English here." It wasn't the first time I had felt out of place, but it was the first time it had been made so obvious to me. That day, I didn't tell my parents about what happened. I was ashamed, embarrassed, and afraid that they would somehow think it was my fault. After all, I had just been speaking to my friend, right? But later that night, as I lay in bed, the words from Ms. Walker kept replaying in my head. Why should I be ashamed of who I am and where I come from? Why should I feel like I had to hide a part of myself just because it didn't fit into someone else's idea of what was acceptable? It wasn't just about the words she had said. It was about the way she had made me feel, like my identity, my culture, my language, was somehow inferior. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to stay silent. If my language was something to be ashamed of, then I would stand up for it. I would find a way to let others know that who I am is something to be proud of, not something to hide. The next day, I walked into school with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew that I couldn't just let this slide. I had to say something. I had to show Ms. Walker and everyone else that my language wasn't just words. It was a part of my identity, my history, my family, and I was no longer going to apologize for it. Little did I know that standing up for myself that day would lead to something much bigger than I ever expected. The next day, I walked into class with a nervous energy buzzing in my chest. The moment I stepped through the door, my heart skipped a beat. Miss Walker was already at the front of the room, scribbling something on the board. She glanced over at me as I entered, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, like she knew something was coming. But I didn't care. I couldn't let myself care. I had made up my mind the night before. No matter how nervous I felt or how much I wanted to avoid conflict, I couldn't let this slide. I was tired of feeling like I had to hide a part of myself just to fit in. If speaking my language made others uncomfortable, then that was their problem, not mine. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel ashamed of who I was. As I sat down at my desk, I could feel the eyes of my classmates on me. It was the same feeling as yesterday, but this time something was different. This time, I wasn't going to shrink back. I wasn't going to let anyone silence me. My thoughts were clear, focused. This was not just about a misunderstanding in the classroom anymore. This was about standing up for myself, for my culture, and for every person who had ever felt like they didn't belong. The class began, and Ms. Walker started her usual routine. But I couldn't focus on the lesson. I was too busy trying to figure out how I was going to confront her. My palms were sweaty and my heart raced, but I took a deep breath. I had to do this. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I raised my hand. Ms. Walker stopped speaking and looked at me as if surprised. "Yes?" she asked, her voice cool but curious. I stood up, my legs shaky but determined. "Ms. Walker," I began, my voice unsteady at first, but it quickly steadied as I spoke. "Yesterday you said I couldn't speak my language in class. You told me that we speak English here, but that's not true. I have the right to speak my language, just like everyone else has the right to speak theirs. My language is part of who I am. It's a part of my family and my history, and I shouldn't have to hide that just because it's different from what you're used to." There was a moment of silence in the room. My classmates were watching, some of them looking surprised, others intrigued. I could feel their gazes on me, and for the first time, I didn't care. I had said it. I had said what I needed to say. Ms. Walker blinked, and for a moment I thought she might respond with something defensive, something to shut me down like she had yesterday. But she didn't. Instead, she looked thoughtful. "I see," she said slowly, as though weighing my words. "I didn't realize that's how it made you feel. I apologize if I upset you." Her apology, though unexpected, didn't change the way I felt. It wasn't just about the apology, it was about the acknowledgement. She had heard me, she understood what I was saying, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like my voice mattered. But that wasn't the end of it. I wasn't about to let this moment fade away and be forgotten. This wasn't just about standing up to one teacher. This was bigger than that. I couldn't let the system, the school, or society in general continue to make people feel like they had to hide who they were just to fit in. If I could stand up for myself, maybe I could help others do the same. The following days were a whirlwind. Word of my confrontation with Miss Walker spread quickly through the school. Some students supported me, telling me they admired my courage to speak up. Others, however, weren't as kind. I heard whispers behind my back, and some of the kids in my class made jokes about how I had caused a scene. They called me the language girl, but not in a flattering way. It stung at first, but then I remembered what I had done. I wasn't ashamed. They could call me whatever they wanted, but I had stood up for myself. And that meant everything. It wasn't just the kids at school who had something to say about what happened. My mom, who had always been my rock, was proud of me for speaking up. She told me that our language, our culture, was something to be proud of, something that deserved respect. She said I had every right to speak it wherever I was, and I should never let anyone make me feel less because of it. But even though I had my mom's support, I knew there were still many people out there who wouldn't understand. In a way, my battle had just begun. What had started as a small confrontation in a classroom had now sparked something much bigger. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about me. This was about the countless other kids who had been made to feel like their identities didn't belong, like their cultures were less than others. One afternoon, during lunch break, a girl from another class came up to me. She had a look of hesitation on her face, as if she wasn't sure how to start the conversation. "Hey," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say that what you did, it was really brave. I've been too scared to speak my language at school, but now, after hearing you, I think I might try." Her words hit me like a wave of relief. It was the first time someone had reached out to me because of what I had done, and it made me realize something important. I wasn't alone in this. There were others who felt just as I did, but they needed a voice to show them it was okay to speak up. From that day on, things began to change. It wasn't overnight and it wasn't easy. But the more I spoke about my experience, the more people started to listen. And slowly but surely, I began to see the walls of silence start to crumble. Teachers, students, even parents began to realize that there was no shame in being who we were. We didn't have to hide our languages, our traditions, our histories. As for Ms. Walker, she made an effort to learn more about my language, asking me questions in class about my culture and how it shaped who I was. And while that didn't erase the sting of that initial encounter, it showed me that things could change, that we could change. By standing up for myself, I had unknowingly sparked a much larger conversation, one that went beyond my classroom and my school. It was a conversation about identity, respect, and the power of using your voice to make a difference. And even though the journey had only just begun, I knew that this was only the first step in a much bigger movement. I had found my voice, and now I was ready to help others find theirs. The days that followed my confrontation with Ms. Walker were filled with an unexpected sense of change. I had never imagined that standing up for myself could spark such a shift, not only in me, but in others as well. It felt like the very air around me had changed. The whispers that once made me feel small now felt like a distant echo, a reminder of what I had overcome. And while some still mocked me, there were others who reached out, offering support in ways I never expected. At first, it was the students who seemed to be most affected by what had happened. I noticed subtle shifts in how they looked at me. Some seemed to respect me more, while others were unsure how to approach me. There were a few, mostly in the back of the class, who continued to make jokes about me being the language girl. But something had shifted in the way I saw them. The teasing no longer felt as sharp, as though their words didn't hold the power they once did. I had stood up for something important, and that gave me a sense of strength I had never known before. Then came the teachers. Ms. Walker's apology, though brief, had made me feel heard. But it wasn't just her reaction that made a difference. Over the next few days, I noticed a subtle change in the way other teachers interacted with me. In history class, Mr. Davis, usually a quiet teacher who kept to his lessons, struck up a conversation with me after class. He asked about my culture, my language, and how my family spoke at home. He told me that he had never really understood the importance of language in shaping a person's identity until he heard my story. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, an important one. And that meant something. But it wasn't just the teachers who were starting to change. My classmates began to open up in ways I hadn't anticipated. One by one, they approached me during lunch breaks, in the halls, even in the library, to share their own stories. Some confessed they had felt just as I did. Disconnected, unsure of how to fit in because their cultures were different. A few admitted they had been afraid to speak their own languages for fear of being judged. The more they talked, the more I realized how universal this feeling of displacement was. It wasn't just my struggle. It was a shared experience, something many of us had been silently carrying. One day, a girl named Sarah, who had always sat at the back of the room and rarely said much, approached me after class. She had a shy smile on her face, and I could see the nervousness in her eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You made me realize that I don't have to be ashamed of speaking my language. My parents speak Spanish at home, and I've always kept it quiet because I didn't want to stand out. But now I think I'll start speaking it more. I shouldn't hide who I am." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Sarah had always been one of the quiet ones, and to hear her speak so openly about her own fears and struggles felt like a validation of everything I had done. In that moment, I knew that the impact of my actions was spreading. I wasn't just changing how people saw me. I was helping others find their own voices too. As the days passed, I began to see more and more of my classmates embracing their identities, speaking their languages without fear. It was like a ripple effect. One act of courage had started a chain reaction, and the entire school was starting to shift. The principal, Mr. Harper, who had always been a figure I rarely interacted with, called me into his office one afternoon. I had no idea what to expect, but as I sat down, he smiled at me. "I've been hearing a lot of good things about you," he said, "about your willingness to stand up for yourself, for your culture. I just wanted to tell you that I respect what you did. You've sparked something here, something that we need to keep building on." His words left me speechless. I had never thought of myself as a leader, and yet here I was, being told I had sparked a conversation that had the potential to change the culture of the entire school. It was overwhelming, but in the best way possible. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just fighting for my own right to speak my language. I was fighting for everyone who had ever felt that their identity didn't fit into the narrow boxes society often tried to place them in. And I was winning. But change, I soon realized, was never easy. The more people started embracing their cultural identities, the more resistance we faced. There were still those who couldn't understand what we were trying to do, people who believed that speaking English was the only way to succeed in this country. Some of them, though they were a minority, began to voice their opinions more aggressively. One day, a student named Tom, a popular kid known for his brash behavior, confronted me in the hall. "You know, not everyone cares about your little protest," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not everyone wants to hear you speak that language of yours. Some of us actually want to learn, not listen to people who think they're better than everyone else because they speak something exotic." His words were harsh, and for a moment I felt the familiar sting of being an outsider. But then I remembered what I had learned from my own experience. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about trying to convince people who didn't want to be convinced. This was about standing firm in my belief that I was worth respect, just as I was. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady as I replied, "You're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to tell me who I am or what language I can speak. I'm not going to apologize for being me." And with that, I walked away. That confrontation didn't end the debate, but it taught me something important. Not everyone would understand, and that was okay. What mattered was that I had stayed true to myself. I had started something, and I wasn't going to let anyone's negativity stop it. Over time, the school began to hold discussions and workshops on diversity, language, and culture. Students were encouraged to share their languages with each other, to teach each other phrases from their native tongues. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was a start. We were no longer just a group of kids trying to fit into the same mold. We were individuals with unique backgrounds, each with something valuable to offer. And as for me, I felt more confident in who I was than ever before. I had stood up for myself, but more importantly, I had helped others do the same. My language, once something I hid away, was now something I wore proudly. And as I walked through the halls of my school, I could see the change not just in myself, but in everyone around me. It was a change that was far from complete, but it was a change that had already made a difference. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I truly belonged.